One of the things about making compost is that there is a considerable amount of what we call dark liquid, which runs out of the bottom of most compost heaps. So one of the big benefits of this type of composter is the fact that you can move it around the garden. You can put it directly onto a bed, or in my case what I do is I collect the liquid from the bottom. The darker the colour of the liquid, the more you need to use it as a fertiliser by increasing the amount of water that you put with it. If the colour is really dark, you should actually reduce the amount of concentration by putting in water at a ratio of about 20 to 1. If it's a light brown colour, about 10 to 1. It's a good general fertiliser. In my case, I will mix that with some urine, which comes from the compost toilet that I was telling you about earlier, and we'll go into more details about that later. Not terribly graphic, obviously, but that urine mixed in with the runoff from a normal compost container will provide first-class fertility. But other than that, I put the compost containers directly onto the growing beds, so there are no losses at all. Whatever liquid is surplus to the requirements of the bacteria in there that are rotting it down will go straight onto the bed and will be used by the next crop. Now this particular compost heap has only been started about a week ago, and as you can see I've topped off the last part of it with grass mowings. That acts as an insulator on the top. It also mixes in very well because the mowings are fairly small. It will rot down quite quickly, and grass mowings have the huge advantage that they help the bacteria by heating up the whole of the compost heap. So if you can mix it in as much as possible with the rest of the compost materials, this is the first stage of the compost making. Now, as you can see, the compost bin, which we've just showed you, is in position on this bed. It will be moved onto the next bed once this composter has finished, and by keeping moving it, the fertility from the bottom end will produce all sorts of wonderful crops. What you can see at the moment is some lettuces called Little Gem. Now they are a fairly quick summer lettuce, and they are getting the benefit, as you can see, from the nutrients, the extra nutrients which have flowed out of the bottom of this composter and spread in quite a big area. You can actually notice that the ones nearest the bottom of the compost bin are growing faster, they're greener, a deeper colour, indicates plenty of nitrogen, but they will all make first-class lettuces. So that actually produces lettuces at a different speed because of the proximity to that compost heap. At the far end of this bed are some parsnips I had left over from planting out, and they're growing very well as well. I use liquid compost and urine on those, mixture like that, watered down about once every 2 weeks, and that produces really good parsnips. What we're looking at here is the last of the raised beds. I've talked about these before. Remember that we put sheets of newspaper on top of the rough ground that we prepared. We put some soil on the top, and this is some coffee grounds from my local cafe. Now, why waste them? Normally they would go to landfill. That's a terrible shame. It's a perfectly good material. It mixes nicely with the topsoil. If I just rake that up a little bit like that, you can see that that becomes part of the soil in just a few easy movements of the rake. Once you've done that side of it, that's ready for sowing. And at this time of the year, which is late August, we'll be putting some various things in there ready for the winter. I've already got a number of things planted in this area, but we should be putting some beetroot, carrots, radishes, turnips into here. They can be sown at this time of the year because this is a covered area and they'll do fine. They'll get started and very quickly. It's particularly useful to have watering cans of different sizes. They will be used continuously. These are a couple of brand new ones. Ideal as far as my birthday present was concerned, to be able to say that I wanted watering cans. So I got grandmother and baby, grandfather and baby, whatever you like to call it. Watering cans are particularly useful. The big plus of them is that with a watering can you're not wasting any water. Before long, from the roof on this building, we will have lots of water in here, and we will be able to use a small hose pipe taking the water direct to the beds. But in the meantimes, and for certain times when you want to concentrate the water on some areas, there's nothing to beat a watering can because there's no wastage. You don't want to carry more than you have to anyway, so logically you will know exactly how much to use. The other big plus of gardening under cover in any shape or form is the fact that you can control the amount of water you put on each plant. In the west part of the UK, generally speaking, the weather can be quite wet, especially during the autumn, and sometimes in the middle of the winter and the early spring you can have very long wet periods. What happens then is most of the good nutrients which you've put into the soil just get washed through if you don't have cover. It's important therefore that the soil is covered. It's important therefore that where you're growing in a covered area you regulate the water so that you get the right amount of water for each plant. You can very easily tell when plants need water. They sag. They change their colour very slightly to a slightly lighter colour. But you can see when they sag, and then that's really a little bit too late. You should have watered them just before they sag. But there we go. We've got the system ready to go in this raised bed. This raised bed is made out of corrugated metal sheeting, one of the cheapest ways that you can make raised beds. Posts are sunk into the ground. Because it's in a covered area, the posts will last a long time. The sheets are much the cheapest way to make a really big raised bed, and as we get older it has huge advantages to have beds that are raised to a point where you don't have to bend over quite so far in order to do the gardening. Here we go, very happy days, autumn's coming, lots of crops. You've just seen me creating the first lot of beds in this area and showing you how to prepare the soil ready for sowing. These plants here, on the other hand, were grown elsewhere, and as soon as this bed was ready, the same system, pieces of newspaper, compost on top, put the plants in. We already had a number of vegetables ready to put in. Being the autumn, this is the right time of the year for these. These are Chinese, Japanese vegetables, Far Eastern vegetables, Mitsuna at the far end, pak choi, and this is a different type of Chinese cabbage. This is the last jar of last year's crabapple jelly. Crabapples are a particularly useful plant to have in a garden where you've got lots of different varieties of apples, because crabapples themselves and the flowering period is over a long period, and therefore it acts really well as far as fertilisation of most of the apple family is concerned. That's the crop off one of our small crabapple trees, and this will be made into crabapple jelly very, very simply. Now, they're fairly small fruit. They obviously would take an awful long time to chop them all up, so what you do is literally put the whole lot into a large pan, a big preserving pan, stainless steel. You shouldn't use aluminium pans for any fruit. So stainless steel preserving pan, put the whole lot in, cover them with water, simmer, add a little bit of sugar, depending on your taste, and let them simmer and simmer for quite a long time. It doesn't need to be a rolling boil. Simmering does the job perfectly well. They will gradually reduce in the quantity, and when they start to get to a slightly thickening position, they can then be put straight into jars. You can quite easily vary the amount of sugar and put more sugar in toward the end of the simmering process to your taste. So it's better to taste them towards the end of the simmering process rather than the beginning. Get it just right, put them into ordinary jars like this, put the cap on, and you've got some wonderful Christmas presents for friends, which will be much appreciated. Things to go with lots of different dishes. Very, very useful things to have, and particularly valuable simply because of that fertilisation of all the other apple varieties you've got in the garden.